they are many beings, we're saying that they are many existences, or you might think in terms of separable existences. And so let me explain what that is. All of us in this room came into this world at different times. We existed at different times, and we're all going to leave this world at different times. And so in that way, you can see we have separate existences. But not only that, but my existence isn't directly dependent upon your existence, or vice versa. In fact, it could have been the case that if God, he could have just decreed not to create me, for example, and that doesn't really have an effect on your existence per se. He could have created a world with you and without me, or vice versa. He could have created a world with me and where you're not in this world. And so our existences, we don't just exist at different times, but our existences don't really entail each other directly. And so we are of separate existences, and therefore we are separate beings. Does that make sense? And you can see, hopefully, how the second proposition kind of follows from the first. That because human nature is mutable and indefinite, there's just this unlimited amount of ways that God could have created human persons, so that he could have created more persons, or he could have created less. And therefore we're of a separate existence. Whereas when we talk about divine persons, since, as we've seen, no divine person can fail to exist, because that would introduce an unrealized potential in the divine being, which is a contradiction, and therefore all three persons must exist. Well, if all three persons must exist, it follows that they exist together eternally and immutably. And so that's ultimately what we mean by one being, or one existence. That is, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, they exist together immutably and eternally. And that's why we say there is only one God rather than three gods. Does that make sense? And recall too that when we talk about the oneness of the divine being, the one being of God, it's a unity of being unlike anything in this world. I mean, there's nothing like it. Because we see that not only do they necessarily exist together, but they operate as one. And that's what we talked about last week, inseparable operations. That when it comes to their external acts of creation, Father, Son, and Spirit, they operate as one. So it's not that the Father is off creating one part of creation and then the Son's doing something else in creation, but rather it's just they work as one. All things come into being by all three persons. And so they are of one being and one operation, whereas the many persons of human nature are of separate beings and separate operations. What you do on a day-to-day basis is probably not what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. Even though all of us in this room, we all have to get up and go to work, but we go to different jobs, right? So my operations in life are not your operations in life. We might have common goals in mind, but we're kind of working separately in a sense. And so for that reason, human persons are separate human beings. Any questions about that? Hopefully that's making some sense.
Okay, I have one question, just to make sure I'm not lost.
Sure.
Okay, don't laugh at me. question. So you're saying like 3 persons, right? So you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Basically, they're one being, so one can't exist without the other.
Correct.
Right? So like, because, you know, you wouldn't have the Son if it wasn't for the Father, and you wouldn't have the Holy Spirit if it wasn't for the Father and the Son.
Right.
Okay. And so the reason we're different is because we basically, like the pottery thing you said, we can all be made different.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
Because when you were saying that and like breaking it down, a light kind of came on for me, but I wanted to make sure.
No, I'm glad you asked. No, that's
I'm like, I don't want to keep going into this and then be completely lost. But, you know, I was kind of taught the same thing, that you can't have one without the other, which you made it easier for me to understand it. So.
Well, good. I'm glad. No, that's a good summary. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, and then with the pottery thing, yeah, you know, God has made all of us, and He could, if He wanted, just destroy half of us, right? Yeah. Without destroying the other half.
Right.
Whereas, you know, in the divine persons, you can't, you know, none of the persons can be destroyed, obviously. But yeah, the existence of each person implies the existence of the other persons. And so yeah, no, you're correct. Okay, so if you can grasp, or if you have grasped these 2 propositions, then the Trinitarian conclusion necessarily follows. Oh, we're getting low down here. Okay. And the conclusion is that God is, or let's just say, the nature of God, nature of God is one being and 3 persons. And that proposition shouldn't need any explanation, because if you understand the first 2, then this is just the conclusion that follows. In contrast, on the human side of things, the conclusion is that the nature of man is many beings and many persons. And again, if you understand the first 2 propositions, then you'll understand the third. It just follows. And so, if you were to devote this to memory, and then just reflect upon it, after a while you're going to have a pretty solid understanding of what we're saying when we talk about the Trinity. And it should make logical sense to you. Any questions? Okay, well I'm going to just move on to the questions then, which are basically the questions we've already been addressing. Well, let's say someone comes up to you And actually, let's reverse those questions. Let's say someone were to ask you, well, first of all, they point out to you that a man, or the nature of man, has an indefinite number of possible persons, while God only has 3 possible persons. Why the difference? Why are there so many possible human persons, but only 3 possible divine persons? What would your answer be? Generally, you don't have to give a detailed answer, but what do you think the answer would be?
I would say with the nature of God, there's only room for 3.
Yeah.
Only room for 3 persons, 3 instances.
Yeah. Yeah.
Say that
Exactly.
again, Tanner, what did you say?
I would say with the nature of God, there's only room for 3 persons. There isn't.
Not more, not less.
Right, there simply couldn't be more because they already take up all that is.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then what about human nature? What would you say about human nature to explain why there's such an indefinite potential of human persons? Any thoughts on that?
The essence of the difference between creator and created.
Yeah.
Creator